let's have a look at two of my favourite mixes for fishing big UK canals. So if you're looking to target roach, whether it's with squats or casters or with maggots, particularly quality roach, really simple mix is just a bag of gross gardons. This is the large roach. I'm looking to catch big roach today in this canal, or better quality fish. So the big roach is better than the gross gardons fine. Now, this is a natural ground bait today. The water's quite clear, so I'm going to add into this a little bit of Trassix Noir. That would darken the mix, so when you've got a clear water, you want a slightly darker mix to try and let the fish gain confidence when they're feeding over the top of the bait. It's a pretty foolproof ground bait, gross gardons, just on its own. You can loose feed over the top of it or concentrate the fish just over the ground bait. Virtually everything that lives in a canal will eat gross gardons. It's a brilliant mix. There's little need to complicate it. Now, a long pole mix, we're looking to catch skimmers ideally, or bonus fish. Lots of the canals in the UK now are starting to respond to sweet fish meal mixes. And the mix I'm going to look to use is the Sensa Sweet Fish Meal Magic. It's quite a low fish meal content, but nevertheless there is fish meal in it. Magic's a proven skimmer catching ground bait. It's been used for years, but with the addition of the fish meal, it just gives it that little bit more pulling power on these venues now they're seeing some fish meal. Now, again, this is a natural ground bait, and to darken it, I'm going to mix it with one bag of damp lean, but it's actually a black damp lean. So it'll darken the mix, but the lean will allow it to be nice and fluffy, and you can actually introduce it with a bit of a cloud. When you've got these still hot days, it's late spring now, it's a warm day, sometimes actually putting a little puffy ball in, creating a cloud, will draw the skimmers back into your peg after you've caught a few. It's a great mix when you're looking to catch skimmers on the pole on canals. Check those two mixes out and I'm sure it'll put more fish in your net. There's a lovely little pommy. You join us today on a glorious May day on the new Junction Canal. It's been one of the finest springs I've known in my lifetime. Been spoilt with the weather, but we've come back to the canal today. It was the home of the Division 1 National last year, and the fishing was so good I couldn't wait to come back and have another go. What we're looking at today is basically targeting quality fish on the long pole over ground bait with casters, maggots and a little bit of chopped worm, and then short, again looking to catch some big roach if possible, although it may be easier said than done because the fish are actually spawning in the edge. All the roach seem to be just under the surface. There's another pommy. These are wonderful fish actually, and there's about 3 ounces. They're chubby little fish, really thick across the back, much thicker than a skimmer. There seems to be loads of them in front of me today. This long line's come alive. We fed 4 balls of sweet fish meal magic with black damp lean at the start, containing some maggots, casters and a little bit of minced worm. And we're just lowering the rig over the top of it, spraying some casters. And at the moment, it's a little hybrid pretty much every chuck. What I've actually ended up doing is there's so many of these fish in the peg now, and the hybrids by their very nature, they're coming up off the bottom and intercepting the casters and little bits of ground bait. So I've actually moved the shot down on the rig now. It's a double bulk. Most of the bites off these hybrids are pop-ups, and if you've got your rig set sort of bulk and 2 droppers, you actually end up not seeing the bites as early, and quite often you'll have a bust maggot and you'll miss the bite as the hybrids rejected the bait. But with these double bulks, you either get a really nice sort of firm pop-up where the fish has picked the bait up as they've seen it lowered, or a go under. Just missed that one then. Just hold the rig. 6 or 8 inches out of the water and lower it down over the top of the ground bait. It's just settled there. The canal's quite clear. It was clear when we were fishing the National here, and I'd say the conditions are pretty similar. I think a lot of these fish feed on the sort of visibility of the water. So at the moment there's a single maggot on there. I think they're actually watching the bait fall through the water and intercepting it just above the ground bait. Maggot had just turned over slightly on the hook then. Something you've got to be really careful of. If you start to miss a few bites, just bring the rig in, check the bait, because if it's doubled over, you'll either bump a fish or miss the bites. And the last thing you want to do is start bumping fish, particularly in clear water on these canals. It always seems to be the biggest fish in the peg that you bump, or in your mind it's the biggest fish in the peg. Just lower the rig in again. A few casters over the top. There's another fish, not very big. Little tiny pommy. We fed fish meal ground bait long today with the intention of catching skimmers, but I think the conditions are so bright, although there's a little ripple on the water now, it's generally been very, very still. I think it's perhaps just a little bit too warm and bright for the skimmers, but we'll take one of these pommies every chuck. So the roach seem to have other things on their mind, but we have caught a few, and the ones that we've caught tend to be of a good stamp. There's a few more casters, and then just lower the rig. Final part. You generally get a bite pretty instantly as the rig sets. A little indication then. There's lots and lots of fish over the top of the ground bait. During the National it tended to be a case of fishing squats at about 7 to 8 metres and then this longer line for quality fish. There's quality fish along lots of the canal, and it was something that most anglers made sure that they primed, was this line somewhere in their peg to try and catch some better stamped fish. It seemed to be the difference in a lot of sections between scoring really good points and sort of run-of-the-mill points with a way to squat fish, with 1 or 2 bonus fish, whether it was skimmers or some of these pommies. There's so many of them in the canal. There's another nice fish on the long pole. It's probably a pommy. Yeah. Lovely fish. Let's take a moment to look at the rigs that we're using on both the long and short pole, starting with the short line at 6 metres. So it's around about 8.5, 9 foot deep at 6 metres here. We fed gross gardons, we're looking to catch roach, possibly some pommies, maybe a few little skimmers if we're lucky. So we'll start with the hook length. It's 6 inches of 08 down to a size 20. It's a long shank hook. Moving up from the hook length, we're on 0.10 diameter main line. Now this rig's being fished through the water, so you want quite a light main line so that it acts naturally and follows the hook bait down through the water. Now the actual shotting on the rig is strung number 11s, starting immediately above the hook length there and running at least 3/4 of the way up the rig. There's series in a tapered pattern of number 11s, so starting probably 6 inches apart, moving up, gradually tapered, so at the top of the rig they're down to probably 3 inches apart, so you've moved from 6 inches to 3 inches. So from the top shot there, moving up to the float, these are some of my favourite floats actually when you're fishing through the water and trying to follow a bait down. It's a Sensus Avon. It's a carbon stem. You need a carbon stem when you're fishing through the water because it just picks up all the shot and registers the float as it settles. But the tip itself is fibre, so it's really, really sensitive. It's a great float when you're fishing through the water. I used these in the Division 1 National on this venue last year, and they were perfect for squat fishing. Moving from that to the top of the rig, I've got a crow's foot to attach the line to the elastic. I always prefer a crow's foot when I'm fishing for small fish. Just feel there's no resistance, it's lovely and light on the end of the pole. You'll note as well there's quite a long length of line between the top of the float and the crow's foot itself. I prefer that because you're not directly above the float. It's clear water, the fish have a tendency to actually spook away from the end of the pole if it's waving above them. The elastic itself, that's a number 5. You might think that a number 5 actually sounds quite heavy when you've only got a size 20 hook, but I just find with the 5 it's better when you get into a rhythm, you're swinging fish, there's not elastic everywhere, they're not dangling down by your feet when you're trying to swing a fish to hand. It's set quite soft, so I find it perfect for this style of fishing. So moving from that short line onto the 13 metre line now. 13 metre line, we're looking to catch skimmers and possibly an odd big roach, predominantly fishing on the bottom. Depth wise, it's probably 12-14 feet deep at 13 metres. So the hook length, that's 6 inches again, but this time it's an 0.9 diameter down to a size 18. Above that there's 2 number 10s, spaced approximately 4 inches apart. Main line, that's an 0.13, so it's a heavier main line to offer a little bit of rigidity to the rig. And then from the top shot there to the olivette, it's probably 10 inches. It's an olivette with a little string of shot below it, just acting as a boom to keep the rig nice and rigid and prevent tangles. And then moving up to the float, it's exactly the same float as short. It's a Census Avon, but in a bigger size. Short, we're fishing a 0.4. Long, we've got rigs from 1 gram up to 2 gram setup. Starting with rig with 1 gram, but if it starts to pull, you may need to pick up a 2 gram rig just to keep control of it. There's lots of locks on this canal, and when they open them, you will find that it'll start to move to the left or the right. But these floats are great when you're fishing on the deck long as well, because as the float size increases, so too does the bristle. So you've still got the sensitivity of the fibre bristle, but a slightly thicker tip, so you can lay some line on the deck. Now the elastic again is exactly the same, it's a number 5, but set slightly firmer. You've got a bigger hook on, you're looking to catch slightly bigger fish, but it's still the perfect elastic. It'll handle bream, or if you do start catching roach out there, you won't bump them. So those are the rigs that hopefully will put plenty of fish in the net on the new Junction Canal. One of the most important things on natural venues is varying your presentation, making sure that your presentation is at its best at all times. Probably my favourite way of lowering the rig in is to lift the whole rig out the water, position the rig over the top of the ground bait, lower it in quickly but hold the float just off the surface of the water, probably 6 inches out the water. And then when the bulk sets, so the rig's in a straight line, slowly lower the rig into place. It'll set very, very quickly and you'll see a bite almost immediately if there's a fish there. On venues that are clear, like the canal that we're on today, the new Junction Canal, the fish will actually get an opportunity to see the bait and take it. Without a doubt, I'd watch that bait as it was lowered into position over the top of the ground bait. A lovely roach. Let's get the disgorger on that. That fish, without a doubt, watched that bait as it was lowered into position. Now, another way of lowering the rig into the peg is to decide which way it's towing. So today it's towing to my right hand side. Is to swing the bait out and then let it cock against the float. This works particularly well if you've got a strung rig. So you've got a rig where the shots are spread shirt button style up the rig. It'll fall in an arc through the peg. If you then hold the float on a tightish line over the top of the ground bait, as it swings down, any fish that are there will have watched it settle, and you should get a bite again almost immediately as the fish watches the bait as it's in the last sort of foot of water over the top of the ground bait. There's a little lift on the float there. There's another fish. A little pommy. Let's now have a look at how we lay the rig in on the short pole with a strung rig when we're looking to catch fish through the water. So this rig's a 0.4 with strung 11s in a shirt button style. First shot 6 inches from the hook. and the top shot, probably 3/4 of the way up the rig. We're fishing this at about 6 metres. So we actually get the rig, turn the pole over to straighten the rig. It's really important to make sure when you're fishing these sorts of rigs that the line between the float and the hook is dead straight. Then you just let it cock naturally against the float so that that hook bait is falling through the water really, really nice and slowly with those strung number 11s. And you can expect to bite pretty much any time from when the float actually cocks right the way until it just pimps down to the very tip of the bristle. It's often the best time of getting a bite is just as the bait touches the bottom. The fish will have followed it all the way through the water column, and just as the bait touches the bottom you'll get a bite, particularly when you're fishing over ground bait and the fish tend to be in the bottom third or so of the water. This rig's fished best in conjunction with loose feed. The more you loose feed, particularly with squats or hemp, the more fish you tend to catch with this rig. There we are, there's a fish on the short pole there. It was just as that rig had cocked then. Fish had followed the bait down and took it. I'll just show that once more. The importance of turning the pole over to straighten the rig out. You actually see the rig in a lovely straight line. You see the hook land and all the shot behind it. If you don't lay it in correctly, what you end up with is that the rig will fall in a mess and it won't be in a perfect straight line. So if a fish intercepts that rig as it's falling, there's very little chance of you actually seeing the indication on the float, whereas when it's in a straight line and it's tight, you'll see every single indication. It's really important when you're fishing through the water to maintain that tight line between the hook and the float, because if you don't have that, you'll just miss out on any fish that intercept the bait on the way down. It's a really, really crucial part of natural water fishing, is making sure that that rig is working as best for you as it can. Just missed a bite there. Turn the rig over again. Make sure it's in a straight line. All the time that rig's setting over the top of the ground bait that we've put into the peg there. A little bit of loose feed. Trying to catch good stamped fish here today, ideally good roach, although lots of them seem to be spawning. There's big shoals of small roach all around the margins at the moment. There you are, the rig's just settling there. The float's just going down to a pimple. There's a nice roach. The fish has just swallowed the hook slightly. Well, there we are, a nice roach to finish the session. It's been another lovely day on the new Junction Canal. Very few big fish, but I think that's the time of year. These bream and skimmers in May often move in these big canal circuits. Many natural venues, big fish are difficult to catch at this time of year. But we've caught loads of hybrids and small skimmers, a few roach, although they are spawning in the edge. It's been an example of a really good day's fishing on a natural venue. Caught some fish short and then gone on the long pole and caught on the deck with the double bulk when the hybrids were in the peg initially. And we then used the rig that we've been catching short on the long line, fishing through the water and caught plenty of hybrids and the odd big roach. Brilliant days fishing. Hope to see you on the bank soon.